Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Here's the big call of the last 24 hours. Former New York Fed President Bill Dudley saying this: officials must cut, and they must do it now. Dudley writing in Bloomberg Opinion the following: the facts have changed, so I've changed my mind. The Fed should cut, preferably at next week's policymaking meeting, although it might already be too late to fend off a recession by cutting interest rates. Dawdling now unnecessarily increases the risk. Bill joins us for more. Bill, wonderful to go on this kind of journey with interest rates with you, because I remember at the very start of the conversation coming out of the pandemic, you were one, together with the likes of Mohamed El-Erian and Larry Summers, warning that there were going to be inflation pressures and this Federal Reserve needs to hike. You've changed your mind, Bill, and in the piece, there are several points you've made as to why you've changed your mind. I want to pick up on what I think was the third one, the labour market. Bill, what's happening there that's guiding this call?
I think you can see the labor market is slowing, especially evident in the household employment survey, which is much weaker than what we've seen in terms of payroll employment. Over the last year, household employment's increased by less than 200,000. I think the labor market, and the second part of the labor market story is, of course, the rise in the unemployment rate. We were at 3.6% a year ago. Now we're at 4.1%. And these kind of rises in the unemployment rate are essentially warning signs. Every time the unemployment rate's gone up by more than 0.5% on a 3-month moving average basis, the U.S. has had a recession. This is a so-called SOM roll. Right now, on the SOM roll basis, smoothing it, 3-month moving average, 0.43% increase. So we're getting very, very close to triggering the SOM roll. You know, Chair Powell himself has pointed out the risks now are very much two-sided, not one-sided. Inflation is much more benign, 2.6% for the core PCE deflator year over year, and we're probably going to get another good reading on Friday. So I think it's time to start to focus on the risks of the economy, the risks of the labor market, to minimize the risk of recession, which always occurs when the unemployment rate goes up by more than 0.5% on a 3-month moving average basis.
Bill, let's talk about timing then. This was Chairman Powell in Sintra, Portugal, so not even a month ago. He said, we have the ability to take our time and get this right because the US economy is strong and the labour market is strong. Based on your piece, just on the timing, they might already be too late to fend off a recession. Why are they miscalculating how much time they have, in your opinion, even though they have acknowledged what's developing in the labour market?
Well, I think they put not very much weight on the SOM roll. SOM roll's perfect track record since World War II, 13-0. But their view is that the reason why the unemployment rate's going up is because labor force is growing rapidly. So that's not as disturbing as if the unemployment rate was going up because people are being laid off. The problem with that story is that in the 1970s, we had labor force growth that was also extremely rapid. SOM roll held. So I think you want to stick with the SOM roll until it's disproved.
That said, Claudia Sahm of the SOM roll has actually come on and said, people put too much emphasis on my SOM roll, and actually backed away from using that as one indicator to really end all be all. Is there anything other than that that creates new urgency for this sudden pivot, really a week before the Fed's meeting?
Well, you know, if the Fed doesn't cut in July and waits till September, it's not going to have a huge effect on the economy's trajectory, except the fact that when the unemployment rate starts to deteriorate, it seems to be a reinforcing negative feedback loop. Jobs are lost. People pull back on spending. That leads to, you know, further cuts in the employment and investment. So the striking thing about the SOM roll is not just the 0.5% threshold, it's the fact that every time you've gone through that threshold, the unemployment rate's gone up a lot. The smallest increase when you go beyond 0.5% is almost 2 percentage points. So that just tells you that once things start to unwind in a negative direction, it tends to keep going. And that's why, you know, the risk here is significant.
Bill, your column got a lot of attention, and in large part because you were on the forefront, as John was mentioning, of this idea that the Fed would have to raise rates much beyond what people currently thought at the time, and that maybe even the neutral rate was going to be higher than what it was in the past. Based on the weakening that you've seen, are you rethinking that concept that inflation is going to be structurally higher and that the Fed's going to have a harder time combating it in the future?
Well, if the economy slows and the unemployment rate rises, then the downward pressures on inflation are going to persist. 2.6% is really not that far away from the Fed's 2% inflation objective. And in my mind, that difference is not sufficient to take a big risk of a recession. So I think it's time to the Fed to focus on the other side of its dual mandate, which is the employment side. Powell has talked about the fact that the Fed has two objectives, inflation and employment. And I just feel like the risks on the employment side are increasing to the point that you want to put more weight on that.
Bill, are there things you can say as a former Fed official that you can't say as a current Fed official? I'm just interested in the communication of this. You can speak your mind now freely with us. You can write the piece on Bloomberg Opinion. Can you imagine what the fallout would be if we had the current New York Fed president or the chairman of the Federal Reserve saying the things that you're saying right now at the July Fed meeting? Do you think they can even do that, even if they thought it?
Well, I think if Chair Powell was of the view that shared the same view as me, I think he would probably talk to the other officials and develop a consensus to move in July. I mean, I think one of the interesting sort of quandaries of the Fed is right now they've telegraphed it pretty clearly that they're going to move in September, and it sort of begs the question: if it's so obvious that you need to move in September, then what are you waiting for? Why not just move in July?
At this point, there are a lot of people who are associating political reasons for why someone might want to come out and say that now is the right time to cut. Since the data hasn't weakened that dramatically in the past couple of weeks, we have seen an ongoing deterioration that seems consistent with a normalization. Bill, how do you counter those accusations that this is being done ahead of an election, highly contested, where if the economy can keep doing okay, typically the incumbent or the incumbent party does better?
Well, I think my experience, and I think this is borne out by the Federal Open Market Committee transcripts over many, many years, is the Fed doesn't take politics in consideration at all in terms of this timing of monetary policy, rate increases or rate cuts. And I think that's the appropriate behavior by the Fed. They need to be independent. They shouldn't be taking the election cycle into consideration. And I don't think the Fed is doing that here. I think the reason why the Fed is delaying is I think they were surprised last year when they thought inflation was coming down, and it turned out we got a number of disappointing readings on inflation. I think they're also probably waiting because Powell probably wants to achieve a full consensus. I think he'd like to see a unanimous vote in favor of easing. And the hawks may be, there may be some people who are hawkish on the FOMC that are still a bit reluctant. I think rate cuts are definitely coming. I just think that at this point, there's not a really strong case for waiting.
Hey, Bill, it's great to catch up with you, sir. Appreciate the insight. This piece yesterday on Bloomberg Opinion got a ton of attention. The former New York Fed president and Bloomberg Opinion columnist, Bill Dudley, there on his call to start cutting interest rates